care about you, and we want you to be bold and courageous and full of confidence.
Joyce Meyer, a renowned TV personality and influential voice, found herself at the center of an astonishing and unforgettable moment. The courtroom, typically filled with the steady rhythm of legal proceedings, grew tense as the judge prepared to announce the verdict. As Meyer stood there, her face a mixture of anticipation and unease, no one could have foreseen what was about to happen. The words that followed seemed to hang in the air, their weight pressing down on everyone in the room. In a matter of seconds, her expression shifted from shock to something far more unsettling. Before anyone could react, Joyce Meyer collapsed in the middle of the courtroom, her legs buckling beneath her. What could have triggered such an intense response? Was it the severity of the sentence, or something even more personal? The room fell into stunned silence as people rushed to her aid, the unfolding chaos leaving everyone desperate for answers. This shocking turn of events has sparked widespread speculation, leaving the world questioning the real story behind Meyer's collapse and the difficult truth she now faces: Joyce Meyer's imprisonment gossip. Rumors about Joyce Meyer's alleged imprisonment spread like wildfire, catching everyone off guard. It all started with a few vague posts on social media, cryptic messages hinting at a looming scandal, whispers of an FBI investigation, and talk of financial irregularities within her organization. At first, many dismissed it as baseless gossip, but then the whispers turned into full-blown speculation. People started asking questions. Was Joyce Meyer really in trouble? Had her massive religious empire finally caught up with her? And most importantly, was she about to face serious legal consequences? Soon, news outlets began picking up on the rumors. Some claimed that authorities had been looking into Meyer's finances for months, suspecting misuse of charitable donations. Others suggested something even darker, that she had been aware of internal corruption but chose to stay silent. The speculation only grew when reports surfaced that federal agents had allegedly searched one of her offices, looking for undisclosed financial records. No one could confirm if this was true, but that didn't stop people from creating their own theories. Then came the shocking claims that Joyce Meyer had already been arrested in secret. Online forums buzzed with supposed eyewitness accounts, people insisting they saw Meyer being escorted out of a building in handcuffs, others saying they heard from reliable sources that she was already in custody. No photos, no official statements, just stories that seemed to gain more traction by the day. Her followers were in disbelief, refusing to believe their beloved spiritual leader could be involved in any wrongdoing. Yet, her critics were quick to say, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." Despite all the noise, Meyer's official team remained silent. There was no press release, no social media post denying the accusations. Some saw this as confirmation that something was indeed happening behind the scenes. Others believed she was simply ignoring the rumors, knowing they would eventually fade away. But instead of dying down, the speculation only intensified. Talk show hosts began discussing it. Conspiracy theorists started digging through past interviews, looking for signs that Meyer knew this day was coming. Some even claimed she had hinted at a major crisis in a sermon months before, as if she was preparing her followers for something big. But was this just another case of the internet running wild with a baseless story? Or was there a real scandal lurking beneath the surface? Until official news broke, all anyone could do was wait and watch as the mystery surrounding Joyce Meyer's supposed imprisonment continued to unravel. What charges did the court bring against Joyce Meyer? When the court finally spoke out about Joyce Meyer's case, the accusations were more shocking than anyone had expected. For years, she had been one of the most recognizable faces in Christian television, preaching about faith, prosperity, and living a righteous life. But now, she was sitting at the center of a legal firestorm, facing serious charges that could destroy her legacy forever. The prosecution laid out a case that painted a very different picture of Meyer than the one her followers knew. The first and most damaging accusation was financial fraud. According to the court, Meyer and her ministry had allegedly misused millions of dollars in donations, diverting funds meant for charitable causes into lavish personal expenses. Prosecutors claimed that instead of helping struggling families and funding missions, large sums of money had been spent on luxury properties, extravagant vacations, and even high-end shopping sprees. It wasn't just a matter of bad bookkeeping. Authorities insisted this was intentional deception. Then came the allegations of tax evasion. The court claimed that Meyer had used her religious status to avoid paying taxes on massive amounts of income. Through a complicated web of financial loopholes and shell organizations, she had allegedly funneled money in ways that kept it off the books. Some legal experts compared it to the kind of schemes usually associated with corporate corruption or Hollywood scandals, not a religious leader. Another shocking accusation was witness intimidation. Prosecutors claimed that several former employees had come forward with evidence of financial misconduct, but before they could testify, they had been pressured to stay silent. Some even alleged that they had received threats, subtle but clear warnings that speaking out would come with serious consequences. The court argued that this showed a pattern of deception and cover-ups, making the case even more damning. Perhaps the most controversial charge was conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecution insisted that Meyer wasn't just a passive figure in all of this, unaware of what was happening within her ministry. They argued that she had personally approved fraudulent transactions, signed off on misleading financial statements, and knowingly allowed false records to be kept. If the court found this to be true, it wouldn't just mean a financial penalty, it could mean real prison time. As the details of the accusations spread, the public was torn. Her supporters called it a witch hunt, claiming that she was being targeted because of her influence and success. Others, however, believed the evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal analysts, and religious figures, all waiting to see how Meyer would respond to the charges. Would she fight back, claiming innocence? Or would the weight of the accusations be too much to overcome? The stage was set for one of the most dramatic legal battles in recent history, a story of incarceration, how Joyce Meyer ended up behind bars. Joyce Meyer had spent her life preaching about faith, resilience, and redemption. Her words had comforted millions, guiding them through their darkest times. She built an empire from her message, standing as one of the most recognizable faces in televangelism. But all of that came crashing down in a single moment. The gavel's strike echoing through the silent courtroom, sealing her fate. The accusations against her had been swirling for months. At first, they were dismissed as rumors, baseless attacks against a powerful woman who had made enemies in both religious and political circles. But, as the evidence stacked up, it became impossible to ignore. Financial mismanagement, fraud, tax evasion. The charges read like a list of sins against the very values she had spent her career promoting. When the trial began, the world watched with bated breath. The courtroom was packed with reporters, fans, and skeptics alike, all waiting to witness the downfall of a woman who had once seemed untouchable. Meyer sat at the defense table, composed but visibly tense. Her legal team had fought hard, arguing that she was being targeted unfairly, that the so-called evidence was circumstantial at best. But as the prosecution laid out its case, detailing the discrepancies in financial records, the secret offshore accounts, and the lavish lifestyle funded by donations meant for the ministry, the cracks in her defense became impossible to ignore. When the verdict was announced, guilty on multiple counts, the air was sucked from the room. Joyce didn't move at first, her expression frozen in disbelief. Her hands, clasped tightly together on the table, trembled slightly. The judge's voice was steady, almost indifferent, as he delivered the sentence: several years in federal prison. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with finality. Her family, seated just behind her, looked equally stunned. Her husband's face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open, as if he was about to protest but couldn't find the words. Her children sat in rigid silence, their eyes darting between their mother and the judge, as though willing the scene before them to be some terrible mistake. The bailiffs moved quickly. One of them gestured for Meyer to stand, and for the first time, she hesitated. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the cold steel of the handcuffs around her wrists told her otherwise. The cameras flashed as she was led away, the reporters outside shouting questions she couldn't answer. "Do you have anything to say to your supporters? Will you appeal the verdict? Do you still maintain your innocence?" Her world, which had once been filled with adoration and applause, had turned against her in an instant. The journey to prison was a blur. The reality of her situation only began to sink in as she stepped through the towering gates, the barbed wire glinting in the sunlight. The intake process was mechanical. Fingerprints, mugshots, the exchange of her designer clothing for a shapeless jumpsuit. Every part of her identity was stripped away. She was no longer Joyce Meyer, the beloved televangelist. She was now inmate 324719. The first night in her cell was suffocating. The mattress was thin, the air stale, the distant sounds of other inmates unsettling. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Was this some kind of divine test? A punishment? She had spent decades telling others to hold on to their faith during the worst of times. But now, as she faced her own abyss, she found herself questioning everything. Prison was nothing like the structured, predictable world she had known. The days blurred together, dictated by rigid schedules and unspoken rules. Some of the inmates recognized her, some mocked her, while others seemed almost amused by her presence. "Guess even God couldn't get you out of this one, huh?" one woman sneered during lunch. Meyer didn't respond. She had nothing to say. The media outside continued to feast on her downfall. Every aspect of her past was dragged into the spotlight. Every financial transaction scrutinized, every sermon re-examined for hypocrisy. Some of her most loyal followers still believed in her innocence, sending letters of encouragement. Others felt betrayed, struggling to reconcile the woman they had admired with the criminal she had been painted as. Inside, she tried to hold on to some sense of purpose. She spent her time reading, writing, and eventually even leading small Bible study groups among the inmates. At first it felt hollow. How could she preach about redemption when she wasn't even sure she believed in it anymore? But as time passed, she found herself clinging to those moments. They were the only reminders of who she used to be. Her family visited occasionally, though the conversations were strained. The outside world had moved on without her. Her ministry had distanced itself, her name scrubbed from official websites. The empire she had built, the legacy she had worked so hard to cement, was crumbling. Years passed, and with them, the firestorm of media attention began to fade. The public found new scandals to obsess over, new figures to idolize and tear down. Joyce Meyer became just another cautionary tale, a symbol of how even the most powerful could fall. But the question remained, was there a path back? Could she ever return to the life she once knew? Or was this the end of the story, the final chapter in a life that had once seemed destined for greatness? As she sat in her cell, staring at the worn pages of her Bible, she realized she didn't have the answer. Not yet, but maybe, just maybe, there was still time to find out. Conclusion. Joyce Meyer had spent years preaching about faith, redemption, and the power of perseverance. She had built an empire on those principles, convincing millions that no hardship was too great, no fall too deep. But now, sitting in a prison cell, stripped of her status, her wealth, and the life she had once known, she was forced to ask herself the same question she had posed to so many others. Was redemption truly possible? The years behind bars had reshaped her in ways she never could have imagined. The first months had been the hardest, each day a painful reminder that she was no longer the woman the world once admired. The cameras were gone, the stage lights had faded, and the adoring crowds had vanished. In their place were concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the cold reality that she was just another inmate now, another name in the system. For a long time she fought against it. She told herself that she would appeal the verdict, that the truth would come out, that she would walk free and reclaim her place in the world. She convinced herself that this was only temporary, that God would make a way. But as the months turned into years, as one appeal after another was denied, she began to realize that there was no easy way out. This was her life now, and no amount of prayer or wishful thinking was going to change it. She spent her days trying to keep herself occupied. She read books, wrote letters, and led small Bible study groups, but even those things felt hollow at times. The woman who had once commanded stadiums, who had spoken to millions through television screens, was now speaking to a handful of inmates in a cramped common area.
In 13, we see that after Noah obeyed God and he built the ark, and he went into the ark and did everything that God asked him to do, and when he came out, God gave him a sign to seal a new covenant with him, that he would never again destroy the earth with water, and that sign that he gave him was a rainbow. I'm sure that after being in that ark for that long, with all those, I can't even imagine what that smelled like. Just imagine. I'm sure that he needed a rainbow. And some of you could use a rainbow day right now too. You know, I've never heard anybody say, "Oh, look at that stupid rainbow." I mean, everybody likes a rainbow. And boy, if we get a double rainbow, wow, look at the double rainbow. And some of you are like, "Yeah, I'm due for a double rainbow." Well, what if God doesn't give you a rainbow?
She tried to tell herself that her message still mattered, that even here, in the lowest place, she could still make a difference. But doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering that maybe she had lost everything for a reason. The outside world moved on without her. The ministry she had spent decades building slowly distanced itself from her. At first, they had defended her, claiming she was the victim of a corrupt system. But as time passed and the public turned against her, the support faded. Her name was removed from official websites, her books were quietly pulled from shelves, and the organization she had once called her life's work was now in the hands of others. Her family visited when they could, but it was never the same. The conversations were careful, filled with long silences and unspoken words. Her husband tried to be strong, telling her that everything would be okay, but she could see the pain in his eyes. Her children, once so proud to stand by her side, now struggled to reconcile the mother they loved with the woman the world had condemned. The media, once obsessed with her downfall, had moved on to new scandals, new controversies. Joyce Meyer was no longer a headline, no longer a topic of debate. She had become a footnote, a cautionary tale. And yet, even in the darkest moments, she refused to let go of hope. She reminded herself that life did not end here, that there was still a future beyond these walls. It was not the future she had planned, not the life she had envisioned, but it was a future nonetheless. She found solace in the small moments, helping another inmate through a crisis, writing letters to people who still believed in her, even if they were few and far between. She learned to appreciate things she had once taken for granted: the warmth of the sun during yard time, the sound of laughter in a place where joy was rare, the simple act of waking up and knowing she had survived another day. Over time, the anger faded. She stopped blaming the system, the prosecutors, the judges. She stopped fighting against what had already happened. She accepted that she could not change the past, only what she did with the time she had left.
What if he gives you what he gave Abraham? Abraham also was a man who obeyed God, made a lot of sacrifices. Genesis 12 says that God called him to leave his home and his family and everything that he was familiar with and go to a place that I will show you. God didn't even tell him where to go. I mean, really, God? You want me to walk away from everything and I don't even have one little smidge of a bit of evidence of what's going to happen next? How many of you hate it when God's telling you to let go of this, but he won't? Anybody ever make that statement? I just feel like I'm being pulled apart. Well, here's the thing. When you try to hold on to this while you're trying to take hold of that, so you gotta whoop.
And so she did the only thing she knew how to do. She kept preaching, not to stadiums, not to television audiences, but to the women around her. Women who had lost everything, who had no one else to turn to. Women who, like her, had been written off by the world. She spoke not of wealth, success, or prosperity, but of survival, of resilience, of finding light in the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like her words truly mattered. Years passed. Rumors swirled about her release. Some said she would be out early, others claimed she would serve every last day of her sentence. She learned not to listen. She focused on what she could control, on what she could do with the time she had. And then, one day, the moment came. She had known it was coming, of course. The paperwork had been processed, the arrangements made. But when the guard called her name, when the heavy doors opened and she stepped outside for the first time in years, she was overwhelmed. The world felt too big, too bright, too fast. She had once commanded audiences with ease, but now, standing on the outside, she felt small. Her family was there, waiting. Her husband held her tightly, whispering that they would figure it out, that they would take it one day at a time. The media was there too, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she had the words. The road ahead was uncertain. There would be no triumphant return to her old life, no reclaiming of the empire she had lost. But as she looked at the people who still stood by her, as she took her first steps into the unknown, she realized that maybe, just maybe, redemption was still possible. Not in the way she had once imagined, not in the way she had spent her life preaching about. but in a new way, in a real way. And that, she decided, would have to be enough.